It's New Bike Day, probably one of the best days you're ever going to have on this planet, aside from being a kid at Christmas, I suppose. However, there's lots to do in terms of setting up your new e-mountain bike and getting most out of it from when you're out there on your rides. And today, I'm guiding you through it. Now, most e-mountain bikes will come with an app that will allow you to connect your phone to your bike. Brands such as Bosch, Shimano, Fazua, Specialized, Giant, and many more all have this facility if you go and search for it. And why is it important to tune into it? Well, you can plan your rides. You'll be able to track your rides. There'll be maps on there, see how much power you've used and what power mode you've used on the actual ride, depending on the app. You'll be able to see how much effort you've been using, how many calories you've burnt. Some apps will allow you to see how much range you have left on a ride. There'll be lock features for if your bike gets stolen. You can register your bike for warranty, check the status of your battery and motor, look for updates on your e-bike system, change the power characteristics from more range, less power to more power, less range. Then there's the charging process, and you really need to familiarize yourself with how you're going to charge your battery, whether you're going to charge your battery on your bike or possibly remove it to charge up in your house. Also take a note of how long the battery takes to charge from flat to that full 100%. You will of course need to charge your e-bike before heading out on it, and it's very, very simple to do. All you need to do is find that battery charge port or the connection and plug in your charger, much like you do on your mobile phone. Once that's all connected, it's time to switch that charger on. And as soon as you turn that switch from your charger, within a few seconds, you should hear from the system that the battery charging is taking place. It'll either beep at you or the display will light up and you'll see that the charging is taking place. Now, once that's charged up to 100%, you just unplug your charger, make sure you plug that charge port cover firmly shut, stop any debris going in, and head out to your first time on the trails. The type of riding that you do and the style of riding that you have, and also your weight, will denote the amount of pressure that you run in your tyres. And also your choice of tyres and the pressure you run them at will also affect how much comfort and control you have of your bike. For general trail riding, too hard a tyre makes a small contact patch and offers very little grip, and will make every rock, root and bump amplify through your bike to your handlebars and give a very harsh ride. A tyre with too little pressure will roll very slowly and be very unpredictable if pushed hard. And of course, if you're running tubes, it can cause a puncture very easily. Tyre pressure is a very personal thing, and it changes for different styles of riding, the conditions and rider weight, and also whether it's a tubed or tubeless setup will come into play. And of course, the tyre carcass and the style of tyre will also matter too. And as a rough guide, 20 PSI is very soft, whereas 40 PSI is very hard. So if you aim somewhere between these two parameters, you should be somewhere fairly handy. And don't forget, the writing on the side of your sidewall isn't the tyre pressure that you should be running at. That is a maximum pressure. So don't go pumping your tyres up to that one. Now, one thing that can annihilate your fresh e-mountain bike out of the box is by fitting your pedals incorrectly. Now, all mountain bikes and e-bikes have a right-hand thread on the right side of the bike. So this is a regular thread that the pedals will wind in the normal clockwise direction. On the left-hand side of the bike, as you sit on it, that pedal has a left-hand thread, meaning to start that thread, you need to be turning it anti-clockwise to do it up. And if you confuse these two, you will definitely write off your crank straight away. And you really need to make sure you're fitting the right side pedal to the right side of the bike. On the pedal's axle, you'll find a marking that will say L or R. Sometimes on the left-hand pedal, this is just going to be a little line around the axle of the pedal, but you need to make sure you're fitting those to the correct side of the bike. And all you're going to do is add a little bit of grease to each side of the axle, wind it into the crank, just using your fingers at first to make sure you're not cross-threading it or got the wrong side pedal in, and you just crank them up nice and easy with your fingers, then just finish it off with an Allen key or a pedal spanner. Now, seat and seat height is going to be affected by many different things. Firstly is whether you've got a dropper seat post fitted on your bike. Now, a dropper seat post is a really cool bit of kit. It allows you to adjust the height of your seat all at the flick of a lever from your handlebars. And if you haven't got one, I strongly suggest you get one fitted ASAP. Now, the saddle on your e-mountain bike can be adjusted in a variety of different ways, or by just undoing the bolts that hold it on. Now, these will be on the side of the saddle clamp or underneath the saddle. Undoing these bolts, you'll be able to slide your saddle forward in the rails, backwards in the rails, and also adjust the amount of tilt that you have on your saddle, meaning you can lower the nose of the saddle down and raise the back up, or vice versa, raise the nose up and drop the back of the saddle down. It's really important to get this dialed because you'll be spending a lot of time on the saddle of your e-bike. And to get that seat height dialed, it's a pretty simple process. All you do is raise your dropper seat post up to its highest setting, sit on your bike. All you do is back pedal your bike and get that pedal to the bottom of the stroke, and you should have a slight bend in your knee when that foot is on the pedal. And obviously you can fine tune this by raising and lowering the fixed part of your seat post in your frame. Now, your bike may have been built and inspected by a mechanic, but a quick bolt check certainly wouldn't go amiss before you go out on your first ride. And we quickly do the M check before every single ride, just to make sure a component isn't loose and going to potentially fall off and end a ride early. We start down at the front wheel axle, check the front disc rotor bolt, head up to the headstock area of the bike, the headset, the handlebars and all your controls. Nip down to the motor area, chain ring, crank bolts, pedals, up to your seat post, checking again all those clamps up there. Then we drop down to the back of the bike to check out all the components on the rear of the bike too. Now, a quick bolt check before you go out for a ride and after every ride is definitely advised, just to make sure your e-bike isn't in danger of ending any of those rides early. Now, one of the most important aspects of setting your e-mountain bike up is going to be the suspension on your bike, assuming that you have got suspension on the front and the rear of your bike. However, sag is one of the most important terms when it comes to setting up suspension that I can advise you of. Now, sag, if you're not familiar with it, is the amount of travel that your suspension uses when you're stood on your bike. Now, to adjust this, we use a shock pump and either increase or decrease the amount of air that is in your suspension. Now, if you're not familiar with how to set up your suspension, I strongly advise taking it to a bike shop. Now, if you can't get to a bike shop to have your bike set up, now most manufacturers will have that information on their website of how much pressure you need to run in your suspension depending on your weight. And in fact, some forks and some shocks will actually have that information on the side of the fork leg or on the shock can itself. Properly set up suspension on your e-bike will improve the ride massively. Now, if you've got your suspension too hard, it's going to give you a really stiff ride and amplify every rocking route through your bike. Now, if you've got it unbalanced, it could mean that your weight is in the wrong place, giving you a very unbalanced ride, and it could potentially damage components and, of course, yourself if you were to crash. If you get it set up, you can guarantee an absolute magic carpet ride from your e-bike. And lastly, don't forget one vital part of the puzzle when it comes to setting up your suspension is to actually wear the same kit that you hit the trails with. Now, I mean, putting on your backpack, putting on your helmet, putting your spare battery in, filling your camelback up with water as well. Because if you don't put all that kit on, your suspension isn't going to be set at the correct weight. Now, the cockpit area of your bike is one area you can really get into and custom tune it as to how you want your e-bike to feel. Now, there's lots going on up at the front, but on this bike in particular, it's got a fixed one-piece bar and stem, so I can't adjust too much aside from my controls, but there's lots of different adjustments you can probably make on your e-bike. So let's take a look at those. By undoing this plate on the front of the stem by using these 4 bolts, or it could be 2 on your bike, you can simply tilt the handlebars front or rear. Just have a play around with that and see which feels comfortable. You can also adjust the height of your handlebar itself by adjusting these stem spaces that go above or below your stem. If you add spaces below your stem, it's going to raise that bar height up. If you take the spaces out and put them on top of the stem, it's going to lower your handlebar. Now, this can make a massive difference as to how your e-bike feels, especially when it comes to comfort. Now, the controls on your e-mountain bike will all move super easy. Now, the controls are going to be your brake levers, your power mode controller, your gears, and of course that dropper seat post lever. Now, you can adjust these inboard or outboard by sliding them down or up the handlebars. And you can also adjust the angle that most of them sit at, meaning that if you want your brake levers raised up, just undo the clamp and raise that brake lever up. Or if you want a slightly steeper angle, you can push them down. Or if you can't quite reach your gear lever, slide it down towards the grip. There's so much adjustment that can be made, and you can really fine tune your cockpit to get the most out of it and all those different controls. Just make sure there's no funky angles going on and everything is within easy reach. So there you go, a few tips on setting up your new e-mountain bike and getting the most from it. Get involved in the comments box down below. Let us know which bike you bought and how you went about setting it up. Did you swap any components out? We'd love to hear from you guys. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to us here on the channel to make sure you're not missing out. And whilst you're there subscribing, get in that shop, order some jerseys, order some shorts, and look as cool as me.